Welcome, innovators, business owners, entrepreneurs, technology experts, academia, government R&D communities, and members of the North Carolina innovation ecosystem. This is Defense Technology Talks, hosted by the North Carolina Defense Technology Transition Office, or NC DefTech. This podcast will showcase various technologies with local and national experts who aim to solve complex national security problems. In the coming weeks, we will highlight North Carolinians with the potential to, or those that have positively contributed to enhancing the capabilities of our warfighters, law enforcement, and first responders. We will also feature government leaders in research and development who have helped shape the future in this domain. These podcasts are just one of the many free services provided by the North Carolina government to assist the North Carolina innovation ecosystem to thrive and provide solutions to our nation. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Rob Robinson from the Defense Technology Transition Office, or DefTech. We have a small business showcase this week with Rich Vosburgh. So I'm not going to tell too much more about his background. We'll allow him to give you guys that information. But really, we're looking to figure out what government problem he's trying to solve, what technology that he has. And guess what? If you find something interesting in this conversation, in a couple of weeks, you'll have a chance to talk to him face to face because he's going to be at the Defense Technology Summit that's going to be hosted by Fayetteville Tech in association with the AUSA event that's going to be following up. There's a warfighter exercise afterwards. And so great opportunity to come out and see some technologies, shake hands with some warfighters, get some actual feedback, and see if there's a use case for your technology. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Rick. Rick, tell us a little bit about yourself and what company that you represent.
Thanks, Rob. It's Rich Vosburgh at Archaius Inc., a venture-backed startup in Durham, North Carolina. We're focused on assured PNT and including in that protection of video links for loitering weapons, which is what I'll talk about at DefTech, and also GPS-denied navigation. We'll focus today on the anti-jamming capabilities and its disruptive applications to navigation in extreme environments.
That's huge. And really, that's one of the big pieces of feedback that's coming out of Ukraine right now is, the amount of electromagnetic interference that is going on with every operation out there. And particularly when you're using commercial off-the-shelf drones, those aren't hard frequencies to detect, right? We know that they're going to be somewhere, particularly if I'm using a DJI, they're going to fit within a certain band of the frequency. So those are easy to spot. And if they're running off of Wi-Fi, even easier to spot because there's 16 channels that I have to look at, so it makes it a lot easier to determine, what's out there. And then the other part of it is with the commercial drone application, the range isn't that far. So it's not like a national asset or a large fixed wing platform where you can fly, terrain features away. I'm within 4 kilometers of my controller when that aircraft is in the air. So very, very important. So you said GPS denied, you said loitering munitions, and all of those are kind of hot issues right now because I know the Army Applications Lab is looking for, different types of drone platforms as well as loitering munitions. I know we can't get too into the technical piece of it, but, from your perspective, what made you think that hey, this is a problem that I would like to tackle for the government? Because a lot of people would shy away from it. One, because it's government work, but the other part of it is denying or operating in an environment that habitually we've had for 20, 25 plus years. It's kind of counterintuitive, because everybody has GPS now. Whether it be on your cell phone, whether it be some kind of device, everybody has GPS. So what made you say, I want to tackle that particular problem set in support of the government?
Well, reaching way back, I actually lived in a GPS-denied environment because my first defense-related startup was UUVs. And by definition, you're denied access. And our company was purchased by a publicly traded company after we'd grown 6-fold in 6 years while developing UUVs for the Navy, and were then purchased for our IP. And then I found out just how incredibly vulnerable the GPS on ground robots was. And I knew that after I had completed the 18 months that I'd committed to that company, that I was going to go off and start something else. And I said, well, I'm going to solve this RF jamming problem, and I got lucky. We've been able to, in a series of iterations, to get better and better at canceling interference of any kind. In fact, without getting into the weeds, in a signal agnostic fashion, it doesn't matter what the signal is. We just go out and kill it. And I think you know that General Tovo sits on my board now. And as I was trying to convince him to join the board, he said, your GPS denied navigation stuff is game changing, but we need your canceller now on the battlefield. And then not too long ago, I saw in a British publication that the consumption of unmanned air vehicles in the Ukraine is 10,000 a month, and that's because they're easy to shoot down, or get lost. And so, what I'm going to talk about at DefTech is our ability to actually protect the entire Wi-Fi band, not just one channel, but all 100 megahertz of it at the same time. We're actually, for the first time, we're able with our what we call GATM capability, we can create deep nulls and then set the bandwidth to cover an entire signal like the GPS M code, or an entire band like Wi-Fi at 2.4 megahertz or gigahertz. I'm sorry. So it's an unprecedented new capability that we can make available with a swap that is low enough for loitering weapons. And as I told the general, my first goal was to enable quadcopters to drop grenades into trenches. And so it's got to be really small, light, and low power. And that's what we focused on. That's
an incredible use case, because really, when you think about it, like I say we, and one of the things as an Army that we saw, because I was actually in CJTF OIR when ISIS first started weaponizing quadcopters, and gone are the days of air superiority, because that's kind of like a space that nobody really controls, between like ground level and 3,000 feet. We'd like to think that we do, but with the onset of the drone industry and them being so ubiquitous and so easily to purchase, right? So like, they're going through 10,000 a day, but guess what? They're able to afford 10,000 a day, because it's a low cost option. It's a much cheaper than, an F-35 or even an MQ-1, right? So like, I can burn those things up because they're cheap and effective. Like, if I can swarm them, even better. I can put, multiple aircraft on the target. But again, that space between, the coordination altitude of Army aviation and the foot soldier is like the wild, wild west. And then you add the electromagnetic spectrum on top of that, then you have a twofold problem, because not only do I have to be able to identify and operate in there, if I turn on a barrage jammer, for lack of a better term, or if I hit that whole band with some type of energy, it does, several things for me. Keeps me from working. It keeps the enemy from working, but I also have a beacon that's putting out energy like at a frequency pattern that's going to be dangerous, because I'm going to be exposed. And most people don't understand it until they see it. But like, if I were to put a spectrum analyzer out on a Wi-Fi, on the Wi-Fi channel flying a drone, you'll be able to see the telemetry and the FPV feeds going back and forth. But if I turn something on that's a 5-watt radio, by comparison to that frequency pattern that's coming on that Wi-Fi channel, it's going to drown it out, and it's going to be very obvious. But again, most people don't have that visualization. So I think that's a great way of kind of understanding it, but pretty significant problem. Thinking about dual use, have you thought about a dual use for this, or is it strictly Department of Defense, or have you started looking into other areas for, like, navigation, open water? That's the first thing that I think. And speaking of your background, I could develop something that would allow, a shipping container to move in a denied environment I'm thinking just off the top of my head, like North Pole or South Pole exploration, where there's a heavy magnetic field that's going to throw off a lot of your navigational systems. So you have to be even more accurate with how you maneuver. Are those use cases that you thought about, or are you just still, focusing primarily on DoD?
Well, any vehicle that relies, at least in part, on GPS to navigate is a potential customer for us. And with a swap that's low enough for dare I say, DJI quadcopter. We think that there's most of the world that needs GPS anti-jamming doesn't have it, because SERPAs are big, heavy, high power, and costly. And so rather than compete with the hexagons of the world for a market that's, measured in thousands of units a year, to leap ahead, one of our ultimate stretch goals is to put GATM in cell phones.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. That'd be very interesting, and I can think of a bajillion use cases that we probably won't talk about on this call, how to utilize that. But I think that that's one of the things, that understanding the applications outside of just the military stuff, and again, because you're in a different position than some companies, because like if I'm a small business and I'm just attacking SIBRs and STIRs, it's a lot more difficult for me to find that use case. But because you've already established yourself a little bit better, based off of your previous experience and what you're doing today, I think you have a much better inroad into the DoD with the DoD customers. But the other piece of it is like the need is there. Every time we talk about, what's going on in the world, everybody knows that, Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran have a pretty robust electronic warfare capability. And, GPS is going to be the first thing that goes out. And the U.S. military has prided itself on the ability to be accurate through the use of GPS. That was like the big talking point coming out of Desert Storm. For those of you that are old enough to remember, in 91, they're like, oh, we've got these GPS guided munitions that can, go through the window of a building and destroy this target with ease. And so we've gotten so comfortable with being able to provide that precision fires, or that precision support of weapons through the use of GPS, that if it's denied, it's a game changer. Now, the downside is like the threat is there. The upside is everybody's in the same boat. So like if somebody comes out and they're jamming the entire L band or the L2 band or any of the bands that GPS operate on, particularly in the military perspective, because those other lower bands may not be as important, but they're still utilized. They're still part of the constellation. So it makes it very difficult to do.
We think actually that we can protect signals from sync GARs to 6G.
Really?
And it's not to get down into the weeds, it's a deterministic capability that's entirely different from space-time adaptive processing in SERPAs and things like that, which saves us time, money, capabilities. And one of the use cases that'll be in my booth on the 25th is L16 links between drones in a smart swarm.
Oh, wow. That's pretty impressive. Like you just added another person on my list that I want to introduce you to now, because I know a couple guys that are operating in the drone space that have done the swarms. However, hardening the swarm just makes them more effective and gives you another use case to tie into. So from my perspective, what you're doing is great. Like, again, these conversations are just like the wave tops of everything that we're doing. And, I would not want to talk any deeper without having like an NDA in place or a SCIF, because you have a lot of capability that,
well, the good news is bad news is that we've got a couple of patents that have already published, though the bandwidth control stuff is brand new. And I'm not going to talk about how we do it because the patent doesn't go in until next Tuesday.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And that's perfectly okay, because again, like bandwidth protection, regardless of what it is important, and one of the things that we don't see, particularly in the military, is like, we don't see a lot of interference. And the reason why that is because we have procedures in place that prevent us from interfering with our own communications. However, when you start looking at, moving into those larger scale operations, I would love to see you attached to, the 82nd going into, a swift response or a North Africa campaign, because one of those things that they do training and they'll do operational training deployments. And in those training deployments, one of the things that, as the division EWO, I would remind all the soldiers is like, look, don't bring your cell phone. Yeah, I know you want to talk to your wife, but, buy a local SIM card and call her from that. It would be much, much easier to communicate on a, local platform, because then you're kind of blending in with the noise floor, than have this, American made or Chinese built American IMEI on your cell phone screaming back
Yeah.
home, because people can track that, and that's one of the things that we don't understand. And if your end goal is to eventually get onto, handheld devices, that would be massive. And I know tons of people in multiple communities that would love to have that capability.
Well, you asked earlier about are we dual use, and very much, though we have what I'll call a strong moral suasion commitment to help the warfighter take it to the enemy, basically, including when I sold my underwater vehicle company, one of the things that we did was we funded a scholarship at Duke in the name of a kid who played lacrosse at Duke, turned down a job on Wall Street and became a ranger and died on his third deployment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you honoring him through that scholarship program, because that means a lot. And
well, the average American has no idea the risks you guys take.
Yeah. Well, and the reason why they don't is because so many of us come home, and that's a tribute to a whole bunch of other folks. It's the people back home supporting you. It's the people in country supporting you. And it's all the technologists, good, bad, and indifferent, that they provide to support the warfighter on the ground. But people that have a mission or a heart for getting gear into the hands of the warfighter is a very important mission. It's definitely some unsung hero stuff. A lot of people don't realize it, and usually the soldiers don't even pay attention to it as long as it works, and I think that's the other piece is the more functional something is, the better off it's going to be as far as, the force is concerned. But when you start talking about applying that to, other applications, like if I can get steel to the target faster or the vehicle to the target faster, then that just increases my survivability as well.
Well, one thing that we should let your listeners know, because if this is truly disruptive, well, is it going to get classified? Well, 3 of the 4 of us who are the core leadership team have been cleared at TS or above. Yeah. We don't have any restrictions now because it's, how the stuff doesn't get classified until it actually works.
Yeah, very true. But it's also, method, source, and technology. We try and keep those things separate. And when those 3 things kind of converge together, that's when we really get concerned, and not in a bad way. We're concerned about, hey, how do we protect this information to maintain the tactical advantage or the technical advantage that we will have in the military. Rick, this has been great. It's way too short, I know, but I think this is a good segue into, your call tomorrow. So he's going to be on the coffee call. This will be Friday coming up on the 14th. So if you are interested, jump on to the coffee call. We'll put the links in the podcast description. Most of our listeners know how to find us, but if you don't, jump on the podcast. And speaking of how to find us, how do we find you? Where's more information can we find? Do you have any white papers published or anything that the listeners need to know about to learn more, or so they can, come armed with questions next week or 2 weeks from now when they show up at the DTS?
Well, we're operating pretty much in stealth mode. I think we want to sort of explode on the scene, if you will. But we're very eager to talk to people who can carry us into battle, if you will.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And again, no harm, no foul. We are not mad at you for protecting, your IP, because there's enough espionage out there of people will do bad things with your stuff. And so either way, we really appreciate you coming on today. This is Rich Vosburgh. I'm Rob Robinson. This has been your episode of Defense Technology Talks, a small business showcase. And we will see you guys next time. However, we will see you face to face in about 12 days at the Defense Technology Summit. And maybe we'll see some of you guys at the AUSA event as well. Rick, thanks again for coming on the show.
And thank you very much. Have a good day.
All right. Cheers. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Defense Technology Talks, hosted by the North Carolina Defense Technology Transition Office, or DefTech. The views expressed in this broadcast are solely those of the individual contributors. As indicated, DefTech does not take responsibility for those statements or opinions and accepts no responsibility or liability for any inaccuracy or omissions reported during this program. The content and interviews are fair use for instructional purposes and to build awareness for the North Carolina innovation ecosystem. The full version of this presentation has been uploaded to our Mobilize platform. Mobilize is just another free service provided to you to access more national security and business collaboration opportunities. You can sign up for more information at deftech.nc.gov. Join us soon for the next podcast coming to a platform near you. DefTech is a subsidiary of the North Carolina Military Business Center and receives its support from Fayetteville Technical Community College.